call the meeting to order, please. It is 4 o'clock. And we respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Trustee Doman, seconded. Trustee Schmidt, all in favor? Okay. Could I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the October 27th meeting, please?
So moved.
Did you get that? Seconded by Trustee Spilsbury, all in favor? Oh, sorry, you were.
I was just going to say that if there is a notation for our Assistant Superintendent Cheryl Coors in both attendance and apologies, so as long as that's sorted out, that would be good.
Yep. All in favor? We have a guest this evening. We have Mr. Allen. Please introduce him.
Two Mr. Allens in one meeting.
Okay, go for it, Todd.
Thanks. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce John Abbott to the board. John Abbott is visiting us from England and has been a friend of education in this province for, we think, about 15 years. When we first heard John speak, and maybe I'll tell the story, John, just very quickly.
I'm never sure what comes out when he starts the story.
At a superintendent's conference, John had the enviable task of being the lunchtime entertainment, which usually means knife and forks clattering, nobody really paying attention, people wanting to have conversations. And John got up and no one paid much attention, and then about a minute in, it was silent. No one had heard what John was saying. And the challenge that he brought to us in the province of thinking about our young people differently, challenging us to think about the purpose of schooling differently. Again, challenging us that we underestimate the abilities of our kids all the time, and really lit a fire under us. He was, of course, a keynote the next year, on the right time slot, and a third time, and John gave us the challenge after that third time. I'm not going to come back and do this again until you guys have done something about it. So I'm glad that he's back. Because his influence on the work and on the transformation conversation in the province was absolutely profound. It was, I think that John was the person who got the ball started, got us all thinking, wow, we haven't thought about this before. And John has been a critical friend to the province over the years as he's come back many times and worked with groups of students, worked with in districts, worked with several ministers now, not just the ones he's related to.
The one I'm related.
The one he's related to, but that's another story. My most used John quote is when he walked into a minister's office for the first time that he had met her and said, she said, "Oh, so what do you think of our province, John? How do you think we're doing?" And he said, "Madam, your province does a spectacular job preparing students for a world that no longer exists." And the conversation, discuss, and the conversation began. So with that, a little bit of a send-up. I never know what John's going to say either.
I didn't know what you were going to say.
Blessed to have John with us here today. We spent the morning with principals, vice principals, Vancouver Island University folks, union executive folks, and our learning team. Then students, after that, students from DSAC. And then we had the privilege of John as a wood carver, of having John visit with Denise's brother, John Carver, John Marsden. Stunning experience, and then a visit into Seabolk to look at the kinds of things that are happening at Seabolk, and chance for John to talk to a couple of kids, and because John always measures the importance of his visits by the student conversations that he's had. So, and now tonight with John. Thank you to trustees for an opportunity for John to address the board and share his current thinking.
Thank you. Well, as you can gather, I enjoy coming to Canada. And I've been enjoying coming to Canada for a good deal longer than Rod was talking about. I first came here in 1969. And that was not as far west as this, but I've been going backwards and forwards across the Atlantic for quite a long time. And for one stage I was special consultant to the Canadian Council on Learning, all of which is really beside the point. When I said those years ago, I think I've heard you talking about these problems for long enough, what are you actually going to do about it? And there's a subtle problem here, because when we tend to think about learning, we immediately juxtapose the word schooling. And learning is so much bigger than just schooling. And learning in the illustration I got from years and years ago when I was leaning on a farmyard gate in the west of Ireland. I was quite young at the time, and the farmer said, well, when you grow up, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I think you're going to become a teacher. And he scratched his head and said, remember this, a balanced education is like a three-legged stool, where the legs are the school, the home, and the community. And as a farmer, he said, you can balance on a three-legged stool when the ground is uneven. You can't balance on any of these chairs if the ground is uneven. And there's a lot of truth in that. If you really want to actually understand what all this is about, we have to see it from the perspective of the child. And the emerging child's understanding, partly drawn from home, partly from school, partly from the community. And of course, as I travel a lot, as I have done, the biggest learning opportunities any of us have is just observing what's going on around us, if we have the ability to see those things. Now, because this is about the fourth or fifth session today, and I had a similar number yesterday, and believe it or not, I've got a similar number coming up tomorrow, I'm going to sort of cheese a little bit by using a few visual aids to bring this in. And the first one I'd like to do, if you can bring it up, is the animation of the first animation rod, which goes back before these. It is Born to Learn. Let's see if we come up with the right one. And it is that first Born to Learn, the left-hand side. Because I have travelled so often, and people have said, I love listening to your lecture, I made all kinds of notes, but can't you give me something which I could actually show to other people so that I can be truthful about what you're actually saying? And so after, this was about 5 years ago, we came to this conclusion. We commissioned an expert in communication skills to produce a series of videos, animations. I just want to try this one on you to start with. It's called Born to Learn. And if you go to the first of that, we'll start it.
Ever feel like you're capable of far more than what society expects of you? I know I do. Remember being a teenager and school being less about a passion to learn and more about getting good grades? How many times did you sit in class, bored and desperate to just get away? Every teen's felt that. Albert Einstein acted on it. Aged just 15, he's sitting in class when all of a sudden he decides enough is enough, gets up and walks right out the door. He never goes back. Remember being a kid and just wanting to play around with stuff, pull things apart, knock things together, and the grown-ups saying no, no, no. Or being called good for sitting still, or naughty when you couldn't bear to sit still any longer. It's all completely well-intentioned, of course, but that doesn't make it any less insane. Because the fact is, our capacity to create and learn knows no bounds, and the latest research proves it. The invention of MRI scans only in the past 25 years has allowed scientists to see which parts of the brain are used by different kinds of thinking. We now know infinitely more than we did about how we learn, So, want to know what you're really capable of? Let's start at the beginning. A baby's brain is amazing. It doesn't take 9 months to create. It's taken 7 million years and around 350,000 generations. All the skills, knowledge and talents cultivated by our ancestors are stored inside it. These are like numerous software programs which can only be activated by the baby engaging with its environment. Here's the striking thing. If not activated at the most appropriate time, they simply disappear. Take language. If a child doesn't hear language by around the age of 8, they may never learn to speak. So you can see just how important our interactions are. They ignite our dormant intelligence and they reinforce it too. There's something else. We've evolved to learn by looking at things from different perspectives and making connections between things. And we do that through play. So wouldn't it be amazing if we bore all this in mind when raising kids? Letting them play when they're little and when they're older too? Charles Darwin's teacher said he'd never amount to much because he spent too much time playing with insects. So let children play, because it's never just play. Of course it takes more time and energy to do this, but when you're deciding where to focus resources for kids' learning, you couldn't do better than focusing on pre-puberty. That's when we learn by copying the people around us. After 12 or thereabouts, it's all change. Say goodbye to pliable, easy child, and hello, rebellious, challenging teenager. Ugh, where did that cute baby go? Oh well, let's have another look at that brain. See what's happening? Loads of the connections made through childhood are breaking up and reforming. From around the age of about 12 through to 20, the equivalent of an earthquake takes place in a young person's brain. No more going along with what the grown-ups say. The adolescent brain needs to go its own way. Oh no, say parents. Oh yes, say evolutionary scientists. Because if we hadn't developed this urge to do things differently, we would never have made it this far. Up until about 60 or 70,000 years ago, it was fine for children to grow up like their parents. But then along came the last ice age. Thank goodness for the handful of our ancestors who chose to break away from their doomed parents, freezing to death in the ancestral caves. They built rafts and set off across the ocean, hoping to find a place with a warmer climate. Critically, this made risk-taking the essential feature of adolescence. We shouldn't belittle adolescence. We should be honouring it for what it really is. The defining struggle, the moment when the next generation challenges the status quo and pioneers new ways of thinking and being that ensure our survival. Now just imagine if we actually gave adolescents the freedom to undertake that struggle, rather than force them to sit passively in class. How about trusting that their earlier clone-like learning now enables adolescents to spread their wings and work things out for themselves? If that sounds terrifying, it needn't be. Because if we allowed their natural curiosity to flourish in childhood, they'll be bursting with a longing to learn and climb unscaled mountains of the mind. And that's not scary, that's exhilarating. This is the way we've evolved to be. It's what makes us fulfilled, well-adjusted human beings. Let's stop trying to live in a way that so goes against how we're hardwired to live. Let's allow ourselves and the next generation to reclaim the incredible gift of our ancestors. Adolescence is not a problem, it's an opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about that for a few moments and go into something allied to that. The story of the human race, as is beginning to become pretty obvious from a number of studies over the last, I suppose, 20, 30 years, we probably became most conscious of our break with the great apes about 3 to 4 million years ago. But that break with the great apes was actually a very traumatic experience. And it was very particularly traumatic for you women. Why? Because from the moment we started walking on our back legs rather than on all fours, you women developed a very real problem, and I'm not blaming you, it's our fault, men's fault. Your birth canal got sort of truncated. And from that moment onwards, the giving birth to children became ever more difficult and painful, as many, not myself will know, but many of you will know the birth process is really pretty difficult. Now, in any other mammal, the birth process starts when the embryo is just about able to stand on its own feet. And if you look at puppies, kittens, anything you like, their young are born almost able to get on with stuff straight away. They can climb, they can purr, they can find their own food. But we humans are different. It's because from that moment we started walking on our back legs, we were able to see more. The more we started to see, the more our brains started to get bigger to cope with that. And here has been the biological problem, that our brains have now grown so fast that actually it is totally impossible for a fully grown baby with a fully grown baby's head to get down the birth canal. Now some of you know more about this than I will, but as it is at the moment, it takes about 27 months. So it would take 27 months if the baby's brain was to be fully formed and born to come down the birth canal. As it is, humans give birth to their young when their brains are only about a quarter formed. And unlike any other species, the growth of the human brain is something that happens much more after birth than it does before birth. And so we now know that the human brain doesn't reach near adult structural completion until about the age of 3 or 4 even. So that in fact, the child born in swaddling clothes really is a very immature species, not able to cope. And so we have to sort of come to terms with it, and what does that actually mean for the world around us? Now, what I'd like to do is to go through a number of little slides here which might make this story easier for you to comprehend, because I need to ask you to take in quite a lot, and now at this time in the afternoon, it's a bit late to do that. Can we go to the first slide, and I'll just tell you Rod when I want them changed over. And this is a presentation which I've tailored for today and the next couple of days here in BC, but it's similar to what I've done in BC many times before. Addressed to children. It's your world to shape, not just to take. And you as trustees must struggle with this problem all the time. You're actually providing children with the starting point so that they can go forward to do things that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. Next, please. Now, it was 1969, believe it or not, when I first came to Canada and started talking about these sort of issues. But it wasn't until about 1959 that I became really almost a travelling salesman for these ideas. We look at the next slide. Next slide, please. Each one of those blue circles represents a minimum of 10 lectures. So I've had to learn to talk about these issues in a variety of other cultures and a variety of other situations. Let's go to the next one, please. And I have to start at a pretty philosophical point. The task is not so much to see what no one has yet seen, but to think what nobody yet has thought about that which everybody sees. We're seeing all this around us all the time, but what's going on? Why is it that country after country is having difficulty with its education system? It doesn't quite fit any longer. Or is it that people don't quite fit any longer? Or have all things changed and been moving on? So let's just take a look at some of these bits. Next one, please. And it depends on how you look at an issue. Next one, please. Did you see a candlestick or faces? Are you seeing the black as the background or the white as the background? You're trustees. You have a responsibility for the education of the children in this district. And you need to so understand that right at the beginning, because what we're talking about here is a paradigm shift. The way that you and I might have gone through school years ago isn't necessarily the right model for what needs to be happening at the moment. Not least because actually, when I went to school at any rate, there was no such thing as the internet. There was virtually not too much television. The only chance I had of discovering stuff was to listen to my teacher. And if I was motivated to read all the endless books he told me to read. But now it's different. Children have access to these ideas all over the place. Can we go to the next one? But before we talk about that, I just want you to look at the world in which our children are growing up. It's an extraordinary thought, but there are 2.5 times as many people alive on the Earth's surface as the day I was born, just before the Second World War. And where are they all living? Large numbers are suddenly going to start coming here by the end of next month. And there are refugees all over the place. And some of them are very rich, but most of them are very poor. About 7,000 people, 100 million of the world's population, own more than 3 billion people. In other words, 1/3 of the world's population owns an enormous amount, and the rest doesn't. And the world is becoming quite an unstable place, as you're going to find when all these refugees start arriving. Wondering what's going to happen. 80% of humanity lives on less than $10 a day. Don't know what your house bill is for this week here in BC. But if there are 4 or 5 of you in the house, you're going to be spending a hell of a lot more money than that. And you're going to be getting more stuff. But is that a fair distribution of where the world's resources are? The richest 20% of the world's population receives 75% of the world's income, while the poorest 40% receive only 5% of the world's income. You ain't seen nothing yet when you think of the refugee situation coming along. Starving people aware that just across the Mediterranean there's something better. They're not going to stop coming, and we've seen in the last few months, we can't stop these people coming. One day, somebody's going to say, what is the fair distribution of people? What's the fair distribution of resources? One of the world's largest 150 economic entities, 75 are corporations. And Walmart alone has a revenue of £287 billion. It's the largest corporation on the planet and ranks 22 on the list. So Walmart is bigger than over 150 national economies. And that's where we are with stuff. Can we go on to the next one, please? Now it takes a British Columbian person to put this into context. Dave Suzuki. And as he said very straight, very correctly, human intelligence got us into our present pickle by enabling us to invent such efficient ways of exploiting nature that our population growth went into overdrive. Now human intelligence and foresight are all we can rely on to see us through the tight bottleneck that is now fast approaching. It's not just the foresight and brilliance of politicians, it's going to be the foresight and brilliance of the kids currently in your schools. They're going to be responsible in a democratic situation for helping us to understand what sort of place the world has to become if we're all going to have a safe location, or semi-safe location. Next, please. You know Ronald Wright lives on Salisbury, wrote a short history of progress 10 years ago now. If civilization is to survive, it to live on the interest, not the capital of nature. Ecological markers suggest that in the early 1960s, humans were using 70% of nature's yearly output. So those of us sort of sitting comfortably thinking, oh, we're the product of the 60s and 70s and the 80s, and we didn't worry about it too much then. We didn't have to, because we were still within the bounds of what we could actually do. By the early 1980s, we reached 100%. Then by 1999, we were at 125%. How does all that happen? It's the speed at which we're burning up oil and other consumables. Well, you're burning them up quicker than they're being replaced. And I don't know about you, but I've got several grandchildren, and I just hope they don't inherit too many problems from us. Because the best thing that we can do is to equip them to live with that situation. Next one, please. So inevitably we see the world from our own particular perspective. And mine on the top left, very comfortable, and did those feet in ancient times, walk upon England's green and pleasant land. You know, I grew up in that environment. Christ was almost an Englishman, and all the Bible was almost written about England, not about anywhere else. And then, the bombers, 1940. And although I was very young, I can still remember the dread of hearing the area sound and going, and being grabbed to disappear down under the staircase as the bombs started falling around the outside. And by 1941, it was already getting a pretty grim situation. Next, please. Now, we need to put each of ourselves into context. I'm lucky because in the family we've got a certain number of photographs. That's me, top left, somewhere about 1941, 42, the farmer bringing in the crops with an old-fashioned horse and cart. That's how I remember farming from a very early stage. I remember my grandparents. That picture on the right, the little baby on the left-hand side is my own father. And on the right-hand side is his cousin. The soldier in the back row had emigrated to Canada 10 years before that, joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and died of pneumonia in France in 1917. But then if I go back to this photograph on the left-hand side, that takes it back another generation. And because only very recently have George Abbott and myself discovered that we're first cousins twice removed. So there's another side to the Abbott family. And I'm very disappointed that he's despaired of education and decided to move on to something else, which is a great pity. However, who are we and what are we doing? Next slide, please. And I was lucky. I went to a very old-fashioned boarding school in England, where most of us were the sons of clergy, and therefore we were all on scholarships. But we weren't told that education was about accumulating lots of exam results. We were told that education was about learning to think things through for yourself. And here's the essay that I was set in my first year in the sixth form as a 17-year-old. And I challenge you to take on this essay later tonight. The roots of civilization are 12 inches deep. Discuss. I don't know to embarrass any one of you, but I wonder where you would start with that. That was the challenge to us 17-year-olds. You've had a good education? Okay, well now tell me this. The roots of civilization are 12 inches deep. So what is civilization? How is civilization maintained? Which is an issue which has concerned me, next one please, ever since I started to become a teacher. And I was very lucky, because when I was 13, I was taught to woodcarve. It's one of the reasons I went to visit a woodcarver today. And I did so well with my woodcarving as a 15, 16-year-old that I was asked to represent the United Kingdom as a woodcarver at an international exhibition. And that early carving of mine of a Scottish Highlander was when I suddenly realized, well, I can do things. I don't know very much about wood carving, but at least I can carve something that people think is worthy of note. And I want you to be reflecting on the school district you're administering. Are there enough opportunities for children to say, hey, I can do that? It's not an exam course, but it's something which I'm fascinated by. I want to know more about that, because that's the essence of what this is about. Again, please. And so my career became relatively straightforward. After that I went to university and rode for the University 8. And then after a year at university, I did a very strange thing. I talked to some of my friends and we said, let's go and live on an uninhabited island in the summer vacation. And we found an uninhabited island, Rum, on the west coast of Scotland. Is anybody knew the west coast of Scotland? Beautiful place. And we were so naive. We just ordered enough food, and we filled up that little ship over there with food for a month, and landed on the beach. And we came back, we survived, it was a great time. Suddenly I found myself a popular lecturer. I was invited to go around to schools talking about how youngsters who only just left school could do something as interesting as going and taking their friends and live on uninhabited islands. That was the world that my generation were fortunate to grow up in Nextbridge, because we had to learn to do things for ourselves. Can I move very quickly? I taught at a place called Manchester Grammar School, which is the most famous school in England next to Eton. But I gave up. The teaching didn't really interest me anything like as much. It was the leading of expeditions that had took me into thinking about how children's learning takes place next, please. And that's what really grabbed my imagination. How do we understand human learning? Why aren't we just born with it already in our brains, that we just have to uncover it? But what is it that we find in our brains? Next one. That's right, keep this one. The human race is the planet's preeminent learning species. It's we who do the learning, rather than the cats and the dogs. But how is it that we have come? What gives us superiority? What do our brains gain, and how they gain that? Next, please. And this is where it becomes fascinating. It's what I touched on in the first few moments. Studies in genetics suggest that the split of the great apes occurred 7 million years ago. Now, 20 years to a generation, that is 350,000 generations back. I don't know how good your maths is, but there are roughly 350,000 minutes in a year. And that's the sort of speed at which evolution has taken place. It's gone on, it seems a lot, but it's happened in a very short period of time. And in all that time, the genetic structure of us humans differ from the great apes by less than 2%. Looking around this room, I wouldn't say you still look like great apes. Some of us may look more like great apes than others. But the actual physical structure of our brains and the way in which our nerval structure works is 98% identical to that of the great apes. But we have something that the great apes don't have. Next, please. And I touched on it in my opening comments. The problem for us humans is that as the brain has grown, so the skull has grown, and so your birth canals, you haven't got any bigger at the same time. And so you deliver our children when their brains are only about a third formed. And that's why schooling, that's why the education in the earliest years becomes so very significant. Next, please. And the next. So mothers and babies need protection for years, which is the biological explanation. So people tell me for why we sort of fall in love and then hold the attention of our loved one while the children grow up, and hopefully hold the attention of our loved ones for longer after that. But it's a necessary part. Dogs don't do the same thing. We've got a lovely Labrador at home, but not the least interested in the kids that he fired aside. The thought has disappeared in the moment after copulation. We humans are better than that. Thank you. So the growth of the synapses in the brain goes incredibly rapidly. Excuse me, I'm becoming a bit emotional on this, but this is my first grandchild. And see how small it is. She is. See how far she got within 3 months. And then in 6 months. And you know, if she was here now, she'd give you the rest of the story, because she'd seen the slides so many times, and she could tell the story for herself. And that's the excitement of human learning, I guess. And the next one, please. But there are certain basic truths to all this. And Confucius really got it right so long ago. Tell me and I forget. Show me and I remember. Let me do and I understand. So you're the board members for the education in this district. Why do we have so many kids who've given up? And we had several of those children today. And they say we're just bored. It doesn't connect. What we're told in school just does not connect with what we're thinking about. And then when you really started talking this through with them, they were every bit as bright as the brightest child you'd meet anywhere else. It's just that sit them down and tell them something. And it's so damn boring they don't want to remember. Now, some of them will have a mysterious quality called determination, and they won't allow themselves to be turned off by that. But most of them don't. They just need to keep the interest level high. Next, please. The human brain has been working at trying to solve problems for an incredibly long period of time. About 15 years ago, archaeologists in France uncovered a number of human artifacts, including a bone with those inscriptions on it. And the archaeologists looked at it for quite a long time, knowing that that bone was probably 32,000 years old. They carbon dated it. And what do those inscriptions mean? Any comment? Well, let's go to the next one. I think I've missed one there. Stick on that one, I've lost sequence of it. Okay, so in fact, once they started analysing this bone carefully, they realised that those markings correlated to the phases of the moon as had been seen from Europe 30,000 years back. And this is obviously the scribbling of some of our early ancestors who were trying to work out what on earth all this was. And the phases of the moon, 32,000 years back. Next one, please. Now, it's only been in my working life, and having left university in the late 60s, it wasn't until the 1970s that PET scans enabled scientists to look inside the brain to see what was actually happening as the brain learnt. So we now know so much about this, but we didn't until very recently. And they suddenly came to realise that in our preferred ways of doing things, in all probability have their origins a long, long time back. We need to find things out. We don't want to be told something, we want to find them out. And of course there is the first key to how you can create a successful school system. It's not giving children all the right answers. It's giving them the strategies to work out the right answers. Next one, please. Humans did not fall ready-made from the sky. Many of our abilities and susceptibilities are specific adaptations to ancient environmental problems. And here's the key statement from Santa Fe. The human mind is better equipped to gather information about the world by operating within it than by reading about it, hearing lectures on it, or studying abstract models of it. There's a remarkable experiment going on here in BC at the moment with Jeff Hopkins, originally from Salt Lake, Salt Spring Island. And he's running this extraordinarily new learning environment based here in Victoria, not in Victoria, just down the road in Victoria. And they've got some 90 youngsters from the age of 15 upwards. They don't have a school. They do have a building, but they don't have classrooms. They don't have timetables. Every child develops, with a tutor, a program of study and exploration that they want for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And they evolve it very carefully. And the teacher, in inverted commas, his or her job is to monitor what the children are doing and people are doing, and then checking it off against a checklist and say, if I design this the other way around, does this satisfy the following criteria in the BCE specification of what children should know? And so rather than starting off by saying, this is what you should know, they're doing the other way around and saying, open up and do it for yourself. And if you go down and, Jeff, you must tell me where that building is in Victoria that has just opened up.
Nootka Court.
What's it called?
Nootka Court.
Nootka Court. 3 of the students in this experimental school about 3 weeks ago said the thing they would like to do as a special project would be to set up a shop front as a Christmas shopping area. And they set it up and it's functioning. And they only gave themselves 3 weeks to get enough stock in. And it opened 3 or 4 days ago. And the whole thing is staffed by pupils doing their own thing, calculating exactly how to do this, calculating which goods sell and which don't, how to send back the things that don't sell, and how they can actually record the way in which they can grow their own business. And they're finishing that by Christmas. Quite a remarkable hands-on experience to get them done. So the human mind is better equipped to gather by operating within it than by reading about it or hearing lectures. And schooling, we're all too old to quite remember that, but schooling requires quite a discipline of sitting down and just concentrating on one thing until the bell goes, and then concentrating on something else and something else. So can we move that through to the next one, please? And the next one. I don't think you can get back the animation on that one.
Do you want another animation?
Yes, could you bring in the second animation? So it's the third one.
Class reunion?
That's it.
Wow, I really didn't expect to see you here. Big surprise.
Hello, Jean. I hear you're still obsessed with brains.
You could say that. I'm a cognitive scientist, which is a fancy way of saying I research how human beings learn.
Wow, that's what I do.
What?
Well, kind of. I'm a teacher.
You? A teacher? No offence, but didn't you drop out?
Yeah, best thing I ever did.
Okay, explain yourself.
Oh, come on, you remember school. Oh, boring as hell. I dropped out because I didn't want to waste my time on stuff that meant nothing to me. I had bigger fish to fry. Me, I was going to get out there and be free. Do what I wanted to do.
Which was?
Oh, you know, stuff.
I see. And how long did you do stuff?
Oh, God, I've done it forever. I'd probably still be sat on my backside right now if it hadn't been for my granddad.
Your granddad.
Yeah, one day, I'm just sitting around doing stuff, and all of a sudden, there he is, just standing outside the house with a beat-up old Harley. And he says, "Fix this up and get it working by your 16th birthday, and I'll give it to you and pay your insurance. And all I'm giving you to do it is this manual."
Wow. So what did you do?
What do you think I did? I got to work. I read the manual, got my dad's tools I got the local mechanic to teach me stuff. I went to the library, got books out on engines, and finally understood some of what the cardigans at school were going on about. And I wrote friends in to help with promises of free rides when it was done.
You see, I love that. It's what we scientists call being in the flow. All the research shows we just don't learn something unless we're emotionally engaged with it. Here you are, at 15 years old, getting a real challenge, and you're rising to it because it's something that matters to you.
All I cared about was getting that bike running by my 16th birthday.
Did you make it?
Oh, that's one birthday I'll never forget. That day, I was easy rider. But more than that, in giving me the bike, my granddad had rekindled my passion for learning. My 16th birthday was the day I became truly free.
That's wonderful. So what did you do next?
Oh, I go back to school, go to college, get qualified, and now I'm a teacher.
Wait, I just don't get it. Why become a teacher when you hated school so much?
Because I hated school so much. You see, the classes I teach aren't like the classes we have at school.
Oh, why not?
In my classes, the kids learn in a way that's meaningful for them.
You know, Confucius got the measure of this 2,500 years ago. He said, "Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, let me do and understand."
Well, that's exactly it. So Confucius knew about it all that time ago. And you scientists have known about it for how long?
25 years?
Right. So if that's the case, why are most kids still being taught in a way that's so boring for them?
Now that's a question I'd love to know the answer to. So maybe we just have to, keep trying to spread the word.
Yeah. I wish someone had just recorded our conversation so we could put it on the internet or something.
Now, wouldn't that be something?
Right, ladies and gentlemen, what is the answer to that question? Why have we allowed this to carry on and blowing the pants off people? Answers in 30 seconds. Would you like to start? Or would you like to start?
Well, the only thing that I was thinking about is how difficult it is to transition into something new when you have an obligation to
Yes, indeed.
keep things going, provide education, but to transform it at the same time. I mean, that's quite a barrier.
You were feeling quite embarrassed. It's awful, isn't it? It's a terrible responsibility. Yes.
I think watching this, and I had to kind of smile because I started thinking of our dual credit program, where we have kids that are actually building hands-on as well as academic, and they're learning to do things, and they're actually, I think they're doing a great job, and this is going, I think it's spreading. We have visitors coming from California where they have a school that does just that, and a lot of the colleges that will be here December 14th, I'm hoping some of the board members come and listen. It all falls along. You remember how I came back last summer bragging about what I saw and what I wish we could do? They're doing it down there. They have they bought a residential school, and they've converted it to all First Nations, open to everybody, and 50% is hands-on. And the attitude I saw with those kids was phenomenal. So I totally understand what you're doing because I sort of saw it, and we've given birth to it in the last couple of years with the dual credit. I think that's an awesome start. Cowichan High last year had, what was that program they have at Cow High for the grade sixers?
Tri-trade.
Tri-trades. We're gradually coming around, maybe a bit late, but we're coming around and we're starting to
There's an ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And we are living in interesting times, because is it our job to keep the old system going, or is it to tweak the old system? Madam Chairman, what's your view as chairperson?
As chair, I'm not the chair, I'm on the chair of this committee.
Deciding responsibility.
No, I actually have to agree with Candace, because you are both former teachers, and so when you look at where we were and what we were, the little baby steps that we might have been making in our classrooms, and it's daunting when you think, well, how do I keep this this, I've got this government thing that says I must do these things, but I'm really, really looking over here and I'd love to be doing some of that. And how do you fit it together and still, it's the change, that's
It
the hard
is,
part.
and we are literally living in interesting times, or challenging times. Yes.
However, because change moves at a snail's pace, and we all know that, you know, how many more generations is it gonna take before we can make the change, where outside organizations are already doing it? You know, they're saturating kids with what they've come to love, they're saturating them in a very short period of time and then sending them off and the work is done. So if we continue to move at a slow pace of, well, let's just make sure and let's keeping everybody happy, and how many generations of kids are we gonna lose by moving at the pace that we're moving at?
We had 3 of your students here earlier on today, so 4 of your students, and they were all on the edge of an alternative program, or, yes, and they were so damn perceptive and so deep down passionately frustrated that they felt they could go far faster than the system allowed them. So that every time they tried to go faster, they bumped up against something, which meant that officially they'd dropped out of the system. Is that correct? Right?
3 had, yeah.
3 had, they always
Come
dropped
back
out
in
of the system.
a different door.
Yes. Another trustee like to comment on that?
A couple thoughts, Sean. First of all, the education system that I've known has never been nimble. And it's a huge organization, well-entrenched processes and values that are difficult to change. And part of it is our public education has only been around about 150, 160 years. And for the most part, it's been largely successful. I mean, we've had dramatic changes in our civilization over the last 150 years. I mean, unbelievable. But perhaps in the last 20, 30 years, we've seen a pace of change that the education system doesn't seem to be keeping up with. And case in point is the use of technology, where it's part of our everyday life, our workplace, and yet it's still quite restricted in our classrooms.
Yeah, it is.
Do we get on the raft or don't we?
I think you can't stand still on this one. And in not standing still, you don't rush off crazily to the next amazing thing that you can hear around the side. What is important is getting to the stage where we understand more about what's going on in the child's brain at the time. And I want to come on to the, if we go to the next slide, Wood.
Yeah, we're not going to.
Sorry? Yeah, it's going to the adolescents. So it's the bottom right-hand one. Yeah. Did anybody see this book about 10 years ago? Fascinating book, A Tribe Apart. And that photograph was stunning on the front page. We're in a different world. And I think many adults and many teachers, it's totally not surprising, find it very hard to keep up with all the pace of the stuff which is going on around. And if we look at the next slide, it takes me back to where I started this conversation. The human brain is essentially plastic. It constantly reshapes itself in response to challenges. But it does this within the blueprint of the species' inherited experience. And there are 3 phases during the normal life cycle when the brain goes through extraordinary periods of internal reorganization, a kind of mental housekeeping. Experience during each of these phases becomes critical. Can we have the next slide, please? And this is where the work of Gerald Edelman in California is so important. Because it points out that every child is born with inherited experience. Our brains have been shaped and passed on because only those people have survived be able to pass on the genes to the next generation. Next one, please. And this, I think, is the bit that really must interest you most. We've long suspected that there is something going on in the brain of the adolescent, apparently involuntarily, that is forcing apart the child-parent relationship. Adolescence is a period of profound structural change. In fact, the changes taking place in the brain during adolescence are so profound they may rival early childhood as a critical period of development. And I've written one particular book on adolescence as a critical evolutionary adaptation. In the earliest years of life, up to about the age of 12, the experience of our ancestors molds the next generation into saying, we need to listen to what you're saying, mummy and daddy, grandparents, you're jolly nice, please do this, or whatever. And we go along with it. Hands up anybody who's got adolescent children in the household at the moment. Or grandchildren, so there's something that's gone on, something probably just about the age of 13 onwards. Suddenly that kid who was always so incredibly loving, careful, and respectful, tells you to get lost, or even worse. And you just say, what the hell's happened to you? What has happened to them is that they are fulfilling something that started at the end of the Ice Age. If they just went on like their parents, they wouldn't get anywhere. The teenage brain, far from being ready-made, undergoes a period of surprising, complex, and crucial development. And this is the phrase I really love. The adolescent brain is crazy by design. It takes them into crazy places. But actually, only by going into those crazy places that they can start finding who they are. And Rod, we were with, we better not talk too much about the individuals, but there's people who are now highly successful in doing what they're doing, did go through a pretty churned up period. And I guess many of us know that we went through a pretty churned up period. And when you're loving parents, and you don't want to see your children being hurt, seeing them going through a churned up period, it's difficult to stand back and let them make their own mistakes. Or it's difficult to be too sympathetic. Because actually this is them saying, I am becoming me. And I once wrote a paper called Becoming Me and Being Useful. And that's really what the adolescent brain is subconsciously saying, becoming me and being useful. Next one, please. So look at that second paragraph, the big one. It is adolescence that drives human development by forcing young people in every generation to think beyond their own self-imposed limitations and exceed their parents' aspirations. These neurological changes in the young brain as it transforms itself means that adolescents have evolved to be apprentice-like learners, not pupils sitting at the desk awaiting instruction. I've been very, very fortunate over recent years. I don't know how this happened. I seem to have been followed by inquisitive 15, 16, 17-year-olds who just want to try and work all this stuff out. And it's quite extraordinary how people of that age rally around. There is something here which is really important. I want to come to terms with it. I don't know that anybody can tell me the answers, but I want to find out what that's about. Next one, please. And it links to something we have known for a while about the speed of the brain. That first paragraph. Neuroscientists are starting to show that youngsters who are empowered as adolescents to take charge of their own futures will make better citizens of the future than did so many of their parents and their grandparents who suffered from the over-schooled but undereducated in their own generations. If you look me up on the internet, you'll see the most frequent references to a book I wrote called Over-Schooled but Undereducated. We tend to equate lots of schooling has mean we've done it. It could mean we've put our foot in it more often than we should have done. And here's the conclusion. Students who get the most out of school and have the highest expectations are those who find school more play-like than work-like. Who find school, they can dip their fingers into a bit here or a bit there, and they start playing around with it. They think, this is fascinating. And here's the interesting piece. Clear vocational goals and good work experience do not guarantee a smooth transition to adult work. But engaging activities with intense involvement, regardless of content, are essential for building the optimism and resilience crucial to satisfying work lives. Those three youngsters in that shopfront store, they were between now and Christmas, they're developing their own shop. They will get so much out of that experience, which, because they are directly involved in the whole thing. Can we just go to the next one, please? Now, I have no voice for singing, and with my voice being in its present state, I'm hoping that somebody here is better than I am. But do you remember the Cole Porter song, Don't Fence Me In? This is the song of the teenager. Volunteer to lead into singing. I want to get everybody just sort of sing this, that we just get it.
Well, interpretive dance in this song.
Exactly, I could give you an interpretive ballet dance.
Okay, do that.
I'm a choreographer by trade, and I prefer not, I'm not good enough.
Right, anybody prepared to have a go? Are you getting good?
God bless you, Denise.
It's coming.
It's coming. And then we'll sing it.
She was watching it there. Hold on, let's give it up. Maybe not, maybe it was just a tease that I had for you.
Give me land, lots of land, and the starry skies above.
Don't fence me in, let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in, let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please, don't fence me in.
Okay, I have to say that's not bad. Okay, stand up. Stand up. We'll do it once. We'll see if we can do that together.
Oh, dear. All right.
Right. Is there anybody who's a competent, so teaches music? Well, I said
No? Denise?
Denise.
That's music teacher. She's a music teacher. I don't know that song.
Oh, could you start us off? Could you give us a note?
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in, let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in, let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please, don't fence me in.
Thank you.
You can't sing like a
That's an important song, and we're very nearly to the end of this, because I could go on forever and ever, and I'm not going to do that. But that song is really rather important. And I just want to conclude it with the sort of challenges that are around us, which make it even more difficult for young people to grow up at the moment. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replicated, and discarded at ever-accelerating rates.
1960.
And that was 1960, the wastemakers. And that is the crazy environment that we're in. So take a look at this. this goes back to Ronald Wright from Short History of Progress. I gave you the quote at the beginning. Look at the forests cut down in Nigeria. And the Sahara is remorselessly spreading down into Nigeria. The sea levels are rising. And I can't remember the name of that island, but in 2000, it was the first piece of land to enter the 21st century. Do you remember this? And it's an island in the Pacific. And it's now virtually gone. Everybody's had to clear off it because the sea levels have gone up. I wish my great memory is failing me. I can't remember the name, but it's just on the international dateline. And that was the best description or illustration, as far as I was concerned, of how we're running out of time. And there are the shanty towns in China. In the year 2000, the 1st of January 2000, Martin Rees, who was the Astronomer Royal, later President of the Royal Society, was asked what chance he gave the world of surviving the next 1,000 years. Okay, he doesn't look an extreme person. You don't become a member of the Royal Society if you're given to flippant comments. And he said, I'm not sure about the next millennium, but I think I'd give us a 50-50 chance of surviving the next 100 years. I fear the speed of man's technological discoveries is outpacing our wisdom and ability to control what we've discovered. Okay, some of us are older than others, we'll be giving way sooner than others to another generation. But are we doing anything now to make sure the next generation will be able to handle so many of that stuff? So my point is this. Formal schooling now has to start a process, a dynamic process, through which students are progressively weaned from their dependence on teachers and institutions, and given the confidence to manage their own learning, collaborating with colleagues as appropriate, and using a range of learning resources. We've got to help them get into a position where they can do things themselves. So, as a lifelong teacher, I feel very strongly about that. And I raise this question with you, as I've raised in 100 lectures in 100 different places. Are you breeding battery hens or free-range chickens? What kind of education for what kind of world? A battery hen doesn't know where to find its own food. A free-range chicken will keep on going until it finds it. So, battery hens or free-range chickens, I think that's just about where I should be ending. Is there another slide after that one or not? I think we can stop it at that point. No, it won't, because this has got a Canadian tab on it. This is a group of teenagers in Toronto. Classes are boring because we don't have to think about what we're doing. We're just told to copy stuff down off the board or from what the teacher tells us. It makes us lazy. In fact, sorry to say this, you teachers, but it's you teachers who make us lazy. Another girl said, you teachers treat education as if it was a pre-packaged TV dinner. You tell us to go to the fridge, pull out the relevant package, tear off the protective covering, read the instructions carefully, then place it in the microwave and set the time and power inputs to the prescribed level. If we do right, you give us 10 out of 10. And I think there's one more slide after that. That really doesn't mean anything to us. All it involved was doing whatever we were told. What we would rather do is work out the recipe for ourselves, then collect and mix the ingredients, work out how long it will take, at what temperature. Then if you enjoy eating what we have made, do give us full marks, because that will mean something to us. We want to invent the recipe and then implement it. So I suggest I stop talking and lose my voice any moment. Good luck. And never think it's an easy task, and never run away from it, because and it does. Excuse my language, two English words. It's a grim situation. it is a group situation. These issues are very, very, very important. And they're coming at us from every possible angle. And you need to take a good view on it, because at the end of the day, it's what impacts most on the individual child's sense of, I can do this for myself, and I have to do it. So thank you very much for your attention.
We have 3 minutes before I must take John away, because I don't get him back to Victoria by 6.
Okay, well, Candice has a,
Is there
Any
anything
Any
that
comments
someone
or
wants to
questions?
say, or comments, questions before I provide
Positive
something
notes.
from us?
You've got me for 3 minutes, according to what.
say it really quickly. Thank you very much on behalf of the board for coming to our district and coming and speaking to us today, and Candice would like to.
Just a very small thank you from the board, and I notice you're getting the treasures that the board has been part of producing in our district. So a book, and I think Denise's department has been part of producing the book.
Something a grandchild too might like being read.
Good, thank you very much.
And,
There will be a
something else
test
under
later.
there.
Yeah.
There's a Hokkaido language CD that was
Yeah,
produced
thank
in
you.
our district.
I will see if I can get some people
God,
outside
there
those.
wasn't. And there's something else down here. I won't open it up, I'll let you open
Well,
it.
it's very
but I
sweet
was-
of you, thank you very much indeed.
Well, I want to tell you the greatest impact you've had on me is, let's get going, because I've got grandchildren in schools now, and they better get
Yes, and it
some
is,
enthusiasm
with
and
so
get
many things going on around
opportunities.
us, you want to
Yeah,
plan a very careful route through all this stuff. And
absolutely.
it's what makes most sense to them. Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much indeed.
Thank
And
you.
I'm glad today's come to, almost come, no, it hasn't come to an end. I've got
We've got another way to go tonight.
I've got nothing to do tonight. And then tomorrow is going to be really rather busy, but after that I think I can stop for a couple of days.
Thank you. Well, don't stop sending your message, because I'm sure that we aren't the only ones that are going to try to quickly move forward now on free-range chickens. So,
It's a nice,
thank
it's a
you.
nice analogy, isn't it?
It's beautiful.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck to you guys. It's a nice place to live in and work in, and you can actually see what's going on around you, and that makes a lot of difference. So, Rod, you're now about to whisk me away.
I am.
Very quickly, apparently.
So have a safe journey.
Thank you. I've got a coat somewhere.
Yep, it's in my office.
Just in your office, okay.
Did you open the door and,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you, everybody. Next time you see me, I should have thrown this silly thing away. I hope, having learned to use the leg properly again.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. And back to the action list. Okay, well, we'll have to check that. I don't believe there's anything on the action list that needs to be discussed at this time.
Don't have any further updates.
Under
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Could I just mention that the policy on workplace and harassment should probably be added so that we don't lose it? This is where it came from.
Okay, I think you have something to say about that.
Just on the action list.
On the action list?
Yeah, thank you.
Another policy. The other policy, yeah. Okay, yeah, yes, Bob.
Is the board communication goals, the language, when the strategic planning process is ongoing, the board communication goals be reviewed, is that just saying that we're referring the board communications goal to the strategic planning process?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next is policy, and I'm going to ask Lauren to come to the table, please. She has some things to say about them. policy 34545, physical restraint and seclusion, I don't believe any changes in that.
Physical restraint and seclusion of students policy was last revised in 2003, some time ago. And as a result of the new guidelines on physical restraint and seclusion from the ministry, it is time for us to update our policy. And prior to this, our policy was really only to do with physical restraint, so we need to add in seclusion of students so that we are addressing that issue in our policy and ensure that we have fully captured the intent of why when we get to a point of actually using physical restraint, and that the safeguards and measures are in our policy so that students are able to learn in a safe, caring environment, and if they need these kinds of interventions, that those are carefully thought about, they're discussed with parents or guardians, and there's a plan in place should one need to implement them. So the revisions that I've made to this policy are in the interest of ensuring that we are carrying out the use of physical restraint and seclusion in an appropriate way that is in compliance with the guidelines suggested from the ministry.
Any questions or comments from anybody? Yes.
I was just going to note that I'm missing the way that policies are usually set up. So at the front of it, the policy number and the past history of that policy. So shouldn't that be added?
It's on my copy right now,
And
in terms of
It's
what
on
it's.
mine.
Oh, I'm not sure what. Okay,
This is what
thank
was
you.
emailed out.
So in order to bring it to the level of where our policies are now, of course, we have the preamble of the policy and then a separate administrative procedures component. And in this case, we've got definitions so we can be very clear on what behavior is, physical restraint, seclusion, timeout, and those kinds of things.
Any further questions? There is a motion on the agenda, yes?
So moved.
Seconded, please, by Mr. Thorne. All in favor? Motion is carried. Second policy, 5100, code of conduct.
Our district code of conduct was last revised in 2008, and again, this policy needed attention as a result of a change in the ministerial order. Recently, the request for provincial standards of codes of conduct ensure that Section 7 and Section 8 be referenced in your code of conduct so that the grounds for discrimination are actually set out in all of their degrees. So our policy required that on page 2, Section 5 and 6, that we embrace the values expressed in the BC Human Rights Code, so we actually specifically state that, and that number 7, respect the rights of all individuals in accordance with the law that specifically prohibits discrimination based on race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religion, marital status, family status, physical or mental disability, sex or sexual orientation, and age. So that had to be inserted. The intent was to keep it so that it was user-friendly from our students' perspective, our parents and our guardians. So keeping it in a language that befits that. Also, our policy needed to come into the 21st century and reference online behavior. So you'll see that on the first page where and behavior beyond these times, beyond the construct of the school day, including online behavior that negatively impacts the safe, caring or orderly environment of school and or student learning. So making sure that we have that in there. And then some good input from advisory committee. I made the change of adding under number 10, under administrative procedures on page 2, aggressive behavior such as bullying and cyberbullying behaviors, to bring that preamble thread forward and have it in the administrative procedures. As well, there was some question around what progressive experience would really mean to a student or a parent. So adding progression of expectations held for students as we become older, more mature, and move through successive grades. So it embodies that concept of rising expectations in there. So having done those revisions, yes, and then on Sunday night, the ministry sent out their new cyberbullying report from the Representative for Children and Youth and the Office of Information and Privacy Commission. And in this document is a definition around cyberbullying that really cites another area, someone else's definition versus combined definition for BC, as well as some excellent recommendations on how we need to move forward to understand and support our students around the issue of cyberbullying. And some of the key pieces, for example, the legislation around C-13, Bill C-13. And one of the first recommendation is for the government of British Columbia to lead the development of a comprehensive and evidence-based strategy to address cyberbullying. And they're expecting that report of that draft strategy May 31st, 2016. So that is coming. But in recommendation 4, it particularly cites school codes of conduct. So the Ministry of Education continue to ensure that all school districts across the province have codes of conduct in place in accordance with provincial standards. These codes should address cyberbullying. So the idea that we need to reflect that in our district code of conduct. So then it becomes a question of how much would be in our code of conduct and more direction around that. And this particular document doesn't give us what we need yet. I think the follow-up strategy in March will provide us with that. But in terms of the practice in supporting students around cyberbullying, we've definitely used at our fingertips the levels of ways to respond to building positive cultures in terms of the erase strategy, then violence threat risk assessment, and the more advanced one that looks at online behavior and those how to respond to that. And in our own district, our own policy around addressing threatening behavior and how we go about doing that, and we have quite a comprehensive document about that, so it's a question of how much we want reflected in our actual policy.
Any comments? Yes.
Okay, just a question back. Do you think that the policy changes are sufficient now for us to move forward on this policy?
I think that we need to have in place our acknowledgement of the areas of discrimination, which is why we set out on this journey. We've indicated that cyberbullying is an area of concern. Going forward, I'm sure we can enhance the administrative procedures to more fully reflect that. So we can pass something in order to have a more updated policy that's updated from 2008 in place, and then continue to bring back more refreshed content in our administrative procedures as more information becomes available around cyberbullying and how to support students in situations that occur.
Any further questions or comments? There is a motion on the agenda that the Board of Education, this committee recommends that the Board of Education adopt policy 5100, District Code of Conduct as amended. Candace and Kathleen? All those in favor? Carried. And before we adjourn, I would personally like to thank you again. I know this has been an awful lot of work and to get everything ready for today after church. Thank you very much. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Candace, seconded by? Randy? All those in favor? Thank you, folks.